Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, 2025 is upon us. You and I doing a show for the first time for the year. How was your holiday break, man? How are things?
Good. It was good. We went on ski vacation. The kids have been begging us for years, and we took them skiing, and I guess it was success because, after 2 to 3 days of snowboarding, they were able to get down the greens without crying and fussing too bad. And it was good.
That's a thing.
It was good. So
yeah, now you just got to make sure they don't decide to give up, all career plans and just want to become
right. Go live in a van.
And that's right. more years of you paying for their ambitions and stuff.
Exactly.
Well, cool. Well, we are going to touch on a subject that I feel like years ago we used to cover a lot because, for those of you who have listened for a long time, Aaron and I, at least in terms of pockets of this thing, one of us was always felt like we were changing jobs, right? Like we were changing jobs. We were talking about changing careers. Things have been a little more stable for a while. I feel like we haven't necessarily, you just changed jobs recently, but it'd been, multiple years throughout that and so forth. But for good or for bad, 2025, we have been getting a lot of people reaching out, both, back channel to us, our network, we're reading stuff and things about kind of the job market in 2025. And this is a rollover from 2024. Things are a little tough. Things are a little tricky out there. And we thought we'd dive into just some of the conversations we've been having with people. This isn't necessarily going to be, a bunch of silver bullets as to, how to go get a bunch of things. But I think, just kind of a conversation about conversations we've been having in this space. So why don't we start there? What types of conversations are you hearing from these days, man? Who's reaching out to you, or what types of things are people bringing up?
I think the biggest thing right now, it's no secret in our industry, there was, a combination of a bunch of layoffs, as well as a lot more competition for the roles that are out there. And because of that, I think the entire industry has shifted pretty hard in the last 12 months in how to go about a job, how to compete for a job, how to interview for a job, even how to evaluate opportunities. We've given a lot of career advice on the show in the past before, but I think a lot of it has changed just because of the macro of the world. And I'll start with the most simple decision that's out there. A lot of folks will come to me and kind of go, I don't know, I'm evaluating these kind of things. I don't know what to think about. And to make it super easy, I simply ask, do you want to go work for an established vendor, or do you want to go work for a startup? Right? Because that kind of goes, how much risk are you willing to take on in 2025? Yep. Because I think, the vendor path, well, no, don't get me wrong. A lot of the vendors are doing layoffs. So there's a certain amount of risk with that. But there is a stereotype that I believe is true, that vendors, for the most part, more stability, and startups definitely more risk. So
yeah, well, and
let's start there.
And I think that would sort of extend not just to vendors, but sort of established. Let's just say established companies versus startups, right? Because
fair.
You could say, hey, look, I'm a software developer in the banking industry. I've been looking
for a channel reseller or whatever. It doesn't have to be vendor. Right?
Yeah, any of those sort of things.
There's so many things out there, right?
Yeah. No, that's. I think one of the conversations you and I used to have a lot was, and again, this has been the weird part I've found the last year or so in talking to people, is I thought, you and I have been doing this for a little while. People can take a guess how long we've been doing this, but we've been doing this for a little while. I thought some of the conversations we were having were very kind of age specific, right? So we had, friends and colleagues and past colleagues that were like, hey, I've been, doing this for, multiple decades, decade and a half, whatever. I'm in some sort of senior role, senior principal role, or senior manager. Maybe they were a director, senior director. And they had gone through some stuff. And I thought, okay, well, this is going to be the conversation we have with people who are like, I don't want to drop down a level. I have, certain financial requirements. I like a certain lifestyle, whatever that might be. You've got kids going to college. But what's been interesting to me is, as I read stuff and I, look at various forums, and we've got conversations that happen over on the, software defined talk Slack and stuff. This seems to be not necessarily an age specific thing. This seems to be, folks that are in their 20s looking for, I don't want to necessarily entry level jobs, but hey, I'm a junior developer. Hey, I want to move from individual contributor to first time manager and stuff. So this does feel like a kind of an industry wide period of time that we're in right now. So I want to keep that in mind too, because as we were thinking about what to talk about, I was like, okay, is this going to resonate with our audience, or are they just going to be like, okay, I just want to listen to, it's only for the folks who are like, I'm in that same age bracket as these guys.
No, agreed. It's very universal, but let's kind of pick apart, startup versus established, if you will, to start.
Well,
in the past, we've kind of given this, guidance of like, hey, startups are good if you want to take a chance. Startups are good if you want to learn a lot in a very quick amount of time. Startups are good if it's, think of it as the lottery ticket. Like there could be some good exits there.
Yep.
But I think our view of startups has changed slightly, because I think the funding models of startups has changed slightly in the last couple of years. And I think that's definitely something we should talk about, because I don't think a lot of folks have necessarily considered the undertones, if you will, of startups these days.
Well, I think there's a couple of things with startups. First and foremost is, and some of this is, you learn this in the industry, and some of this is like, we just don't talk about it enough, right? So the two things that jump out at me with startups is, number one, the vast majority of them, and this is over the last 25 years, right? The vast majority of them fail, right? Just flat out fail. Like they don't have an exit. They run out of money. They might have been the greatest idea in the world. They just didn't execute. The vast majority of startups in tech, but also in a lot of businesses, fail because starting a successful business is really hard, right? And we don't really talk about that, except when we tend to talk about like VCs and we go, oh, well, their portfolio is going to have a handful of losers and also a few big winners, right? So I think that's always really important to remember. And I think the other piece of it is, unless if your goal of this is like, I want to, I'm willing to sort of like do all the things that you hear about with startups, like really long hours, very stressful. You're going to be understaffed. It's, kind of a lot of David versus Goliath situations from a competitive perspective in the marketplace. The other thing is, at least over the last, 5 or 6 years, like we've seen far less outcomes, right? They're not going IPO. They're not getting big enough to go IPO. And the people who could acquire the companies that could acquire a lot in the tech space have been under a certain amount of regulatory kind of pressure not to become too big, right? They've got sort of anti-competitive type of things. And so the last 4 or 5 years have been tough if you were like, what's the outcome? And that's led to the thing that you were talking about, which is this constant flow of new rounds of funding, which, kind of dilute any sort of ownership you might have in the company, right? So like the longer they drag out, it used to be, like your company got bought after a C round or something like that?
Yeah. C round and out. Yeah.
Right. And now you're seeing companies that are having, D's, not D's and E's, but like F's and G's and other letters that you're like, whoa, what in the world is going on there?
Yes.
So I think those are, probably more than anything, the long hours, that's the thing to keep in mind is you're betting on, in any scenario, you're betting on very, very long odds to this being anything more than, a job, which is great, but a job that is going to be probably in some cases lower pay, definitely higher stress, definitely more of a workload. And again, you got to ask yourself, like, what's the thing I'm trading off for that? And if it's experience and the opportunity to just work in a fast growing, fast moving space, and you want to be able to do things like those are awesome trade-offs. I think the reality is if you were doing that because you were like, I think this is closer to a lottery ticket than going and buying scratch offs, like those numbers don't necessarily, they don't historically and recently in history, that those numbers don't add up.
Yeah. And I'll add this too, that I also ask everyone, if somebody does say, hey, I want to, I'm considering this startup, I also kind of tell everyone, because I've been on both sides of this. I did a startup when I was ready, and I did a startup when I kind of talked myself into being ready and I wasn't, is like, what's your burnout level going into it? And is your house in order? And what I mean by that is, if you're going to go do a startup and you're going to go do the long hours and you're going to, put down your head and just work for a couple years, make sure your family's good with it. Make sure your life is in a place where honestly, like your hobbies and all those other things are like, I don't know, like you don't have the house that needs a bunch of work on the side. Like you need to be ready to focus, and there might be a certain amount of get your house in order, get your head in the right place, get ready to charge, because it's, your battery level, if you will, is going to be highest the first day you start. And it's only going to go down. You will not recharge the batteries at a startup.
And that's the hard part about the startup conversation is if you were having this conversation with, let's say your daughter or my daughter, who are like going to be, sometime soon into like their first job, you'd be like, yeah, that's probably an awesome opportunity. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to be, you're going to probably learn a lot about the business and whatever you're taking. Whereas if you're having that conversation with somebody, and this doesn't even have to do with age, but it has to do with like, what are you coming from? Like, what is your background? And if your background had been like multiple sort of well-established companies that had, all the divisions in place, and you were cash flow positive and stuff, but you were kind of like, oh, I'm bored with my job, or I don't feel like life moves fast enough. Like that's a very different, like welcome experience. Well, because like you said, it's a 365 job. Like it doesn't involve weekends anymore. It doesn't involve, cutting out at 5 o'clock.
There is no off hours. There is no off the clock.
Right.
So let me ask you this. So this is actually a good, we didn't plan this one, but question for you then, because you've had lots of them and you've had lots of conversations about it, and I've had lots of them. What are like the red flags? Like when you're either going through an interview process, or you're talking to a startup, or you're talking to the founders or whatever, and or like you and all the, we've talked to a number of startups just as podcast guests over the years, by the way, too. Like, what are the things when you're like, ooh, okay, nope, that's a red flag for them?
I don't know that I have a distinct list of red flags. I mean, there's some obvious red flags that you would say about any business, right? Like. Sure.
Product market fit.
Yeah, product market fit's probably the most important one, right? Like, what problem do you solve? How does your product, like what do customers perceive that thing that you do does, and are they willing to give you money for it, right? Like that's the most important question. And if that's not clearly understood, which you'd go, okay, maybe they don't clearly understand. That should only not be clearly understood when you're like a Series A business, right? Like you shouldn't be getting money for Series B funding if you don't know what the answer to that is, right? Like that would probably be red flag number one. I think the other things that become like red flags or that freak people out the most when you go to startups, especially if you're coming from something that's been established and you're sort of like, okay, I'm used to that. I mean, the first one is, and this isn't a derogatory thing, like, to be the founder of one of these startup companies, you have to have, you have to have a certain passion and a belief in yourself that is like way more than anybody else, because the thing that you're trying to do is literally David and Goliath, right? Like, most ideas are already sort of out there to a certain extent, and you're like, I have a better mousetrap. And so there's a certain understanding of the founder to me that's really, really important. Like, what is this person like? How driven are they? How open are they to taking feedback? Is this their first one? Because if it's like their second or third one, they will distinctly have like a God complex that like, I am smarter than everybody else. I know what's going to happen. Like, to me, that's the founder piece of it is really important. And I don't want to say it's a red flag, but like, they're a different breed of people that are willing to be a founder and take on sort of them against the world. But then I think the other thing, in the simplest set of red flags is just like, how of the people that are there, right? Like you're trying to figure out, like, maybe there's 10 people there, maybe there's 100 people there, whatever. Like, are you going into an environment in which the clicks are already there? Because a lot of times with startups, it's like, these 10 people all used to work together. They know each other. It's sort of like walking into a friend group and you don't know the inside jokes. But I think the other part of that, and that can, that can happen, that can fragment, whatever. But the other thing is like, and this is hard to figure out in an interview, but like, how well do they deal with stress, right? Like what kind of people are they when things are normal, and what kind of people are they when things are stressful? Because that's your world is going to mostly be them under stress. And you're trying to figure out, like, are they somewhat rational, right? They're going to ask you for a million things, but are they somewhat rational about things? Or are they just, do they go into sort of freak out mode? And you have to ask yourself, like, do I want to live in freak out mode all the time? Like, that somebody else is creating for you, not the market, not your product. Like, those to me are probably the three biggest things. Does anybody want the product? Does it solve a problem? What's the founder like? And how do the people that are there that you're going to work with, how do they deal with stress?
Yep. Agreed. So I'll flip it around. There's also like the stable side of the business, and with stable places, there's still red flags there too. Like,
absolutely.
I'll give you, a couple, and then you can chime in on a couple too. Like, I think one of the biggest ones, like, especially with a lot of the stable businesses, is what we're starting to see more and more. And again, like the same way we saw, like, a lot, like early time startups, it was like A round, B round, C round, burn for IPO, burn for sale, whatever. And that's extended now. What you're seeing in stable companies now is a little bit more of the opposite, short-sighted to meet the quarterly goals. And like, we've all seen the companies, especially with the layoffs this last couple of years, of like, honestly, those layoffs is like, lay off a bunch of people this quarter and then hire a bunch of people back in a quarter or two. And so you're starting to see different behaviors than, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago in tech. And that's just kind of capitalism at work at times. But so where it goes into my career advice, though, is like, whenever possible, try and get into the core business, right? Like, if it's something somebody's spinning up, ask a lot of questions, because now that might be funded for a year, might be funded for 6 months, might be a science experiment. We're going to hire a few people, see what happens, and oh, by the way, we'll just let them go. And there's lots of
I
think because it's a stable company doesn't mean it's a stable role.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces in there that you highlighted. I'll kind of put a spin on them. Yep. The first one is, and again, this is the interesting thing, and I think we covered this on a couple of shows. Like, the tech industry, we have a short memory for stuff, but we've gone from this long period of low interest rates, lots of innovation, maybe not necessarily always successful companies, but like a very, very long period of what people would call like peacetime, right? And this is like a quote from out of The Godfather and so forth. But like, things have been pretty nice, if you will. Like, companies have done relatively well, and there's been lots of innovation, lots of opportunities. And we're now kind of in when things kind of get tough, people call it sort of like wartime, because people are more on edge, the time cycles are shorter and all that stuff. So I think that's part of sort of understanding it. And you're kind of highlighting it, like, we're back into that shift, right? Like, expectations are higher and shorter. I think the other piece that you were saying, as far as, like, where, if you're trying to get into someplace, the simplest way to think of it is just draw a line between like where the company makes money and how far away your job is going to be from that making money. Whether that's, and that doesn't mean like everybody has to take a job in sales, right? But it means like, maybe you're not in sales, maybe you're on the product side of something, or whatever, but like, you don't want to be like 7 or 8 groups removed from where money actually gets made, or the primary chunks of money get made for the company. Because those are the groups they have a very hard time justifying what they do, right? They're like, well, we're a support group for this function that does, and it's like, the further away you get from the source of money, either making the money or collecting the money, do one of those sort of Kevin Bacon things, like, how many degrees from making the money are you? And if you're 4, 5, 6, then, those are the jobs that people are always like, every year, it's like, do we keep that group around? Does that group get funded? And those are probably hard things to ask on an interview, but it's worth sort of asking, because you can get yourself into a constant churn if you get yourself too far away from that.
Yes. And I'll give everyone a couple prime examples. So I went through an interview process this year, and I actually did, and this was one of those, I actually interviewed at a couple startups, and, in hindsight, I actually got down to an offer at 2 of them and turned them down because I think it was one of those, I was just in that spot where I was like, you know what? I'm just not ready to make that charge right now. But I won't name names, but I will simply say I was potentially going to be head of product marketing for one of their divisions. And, great. Sounds like a nice big bump up and all of those. But then you start asking some questions. It's like, well, what portion of the business is this? And they're like, well, even though it kind of looked like it was the majority of the business, it turns out it was only like 20% of the business. And, the other product lines were making up much more, and it was much, less. And I was like, okay, what happened to the previous head? And they're like, oh, well, they moved over to take over the big product line. And so it was basically like, other people had moved on and they were kind of filling this one. And it just felt like, it on paper, it looked like an awesome opportunity. But when you started to uncover and ask a lot of questions, I was like, I don't know. It was a little too far removed for the money in that instance. And I was like, you know what? This is going to be too hard. Like, no matter what they're trying to tell me.
Well, and I think, and I think what happens is, and you and I used to have this conversation a lot, when we were 10 years ago, for whatever. Mm-hmm. You're going to go through this period, and this is a little different conversation if you're in a role today and you're thinking about like, well, what else could I do? Like maybe I want to do something else. It's a very different conversation if you're somebody who's like, man, I've been looking for stuff for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and I'm not finding anything. What do you do? And I think to a certain extent, the answers are probably a little bit different, but I think the framework that we used to talk about was the same, which is we tend to go into job searches with a list of stuff that we're looking for, right? Like it's like, who's the company? Like, are they a good company? Is this an interesting role? What's the title? What's the scope of responsibility? How much money does it make? And in your mind, you're like, I want an A+ in all those things, right? I want to work with good people. I want to work with a company that's well respected and treats their people well. I want to get paid a lot. I want, a big title and blah, blah. And or maybe it was like, I don't want to travel a lot, or, whatever it was. And the conversation we always used to have was, we were like, which couple of those are the most important to you? And if you can't get those things, if they're not there, is that a deal breaker? And I think more than anything, as I talk to people, again, whether you're a 45-year-old person saying like, hey, I got laid off and I've been sitting here for 6 months and I don't know what to do next, or you're 27 and you're like, I want to change jobs. I think you've got to figure out the capacity to say, yes, I would like the best of everything, but the reality is there's almost no jobs that are the best of everything. And I'll give you the simplest of examples, right? Like, let's say you were the CEO of whatever company, right? Some company that does $1 billion a year in sales. And you might go, God, I'm making a ton of money, right? I've got great responsibility. I've got a great title. And then you would be like, but am I willing to work 365 days a year, basically be on call 24/7, potentially have legal responsibility if I sign off on the end of year quarterly thing and it turns out that it's wrong, like you could go to jail because your accountant made a mistake. And oh, by the way, like there are going to be 15 people in your company that are constantly hoping to get your job and might stab you in the back. And you're like, oh, wait, so that job may not, I might not want to do all those things. And that's kind of an extreme example, but you could apply that to being a product manager, being a director of marketing, being, a senior engineer or whatever. And I think you and I had that conversation probably more than anything else when we were comparing, like, think I should take this job or not? And I think people struggle with that a lot. And I don't know a way to quantify it, but that ability to say, what if I don't get one of those things? What does that mean? And yes. I think that's the mindset that people have to kind of get a little bit.
Agreed. So let's say somebody's like, all right, they've evaluated all of those. They got something in front of them. They're kind of doing all these other things, and it's interview time, right? Yep. Or it's time to look for the interviews. I've got kind of two quick sections here, which is, interviews have changed. As somebody who just went through the interview process in 2024, it was super interesting because I think universally the interview process has gotten, I wouldn't say harder, but just changed very subtly. You need to be on top of your game. You need to know who you are. And what I mean by that is like, think of it instead of, I don't know, maybe there was 20 applicants or 30 applicants for a job. There's 200 or 300 applicants now.
Yeah.
And so what is the unique differentiator you bring to the market? And does it match against the best thing they're looking for in this role? And I'll give you another, for instance, I interviewed head of product marketing at a company. It was kind of midway between, I'd say mid-sized company, right?
Yep.
And VP of product marketing. Sounds great. I would, get into the role. And you and I actually had a conversation after like my first interview. I was like, all they did is ask me demand gen questions the whole freaking time. Like, and at the end of the day, what they were really looking for is somebody with a demand gen background, with a PLG marketing background, not traditional product marketing, but they labeled it as product marketing. I'm never going to be the best person for that role. Yep. And you just move on. You know what I mean? Like, it is all about finding out what is your strengths, in your particular area of discipline, and does it match up against their golden candidate? Because you're going to be up against sometimes hundreds of other people. How do you stand out?
Yeah. Yeah. So. Some of that's always been the case.
Without a doubt.
Right.
And I think it's more so just from the sheer number of candidates now, whether it's AI, whether it's the market. I think everyone's
part of that's because there are so many tools now to be able to go find jobs anywhere. Part of that's because, and again, this gets back to like, work from home versus return to office and stuff. But, but the ability to be like, I don't have to necessarily be in a specific city opens up a bunch of that competition. I think the other thing that's sort of interesting in the new interviewing process is how much it becomes a homework assignment.
Yes.
Right? How much it becomes we're not going to just do like 6 interviews in which they're going to ask you questions and tell me an example of, you've done this, or, give me, let's say this is your scenario. What would you do? They're literally like, I want to see examples of your work. Or not even examples of your work. In a lot of cases, it's, you could bring them examples of your work and they go, that's fine. That's nice. Here's literally a problem that we have, and we want you to solve the problem for you. And those are interesting because, in a short period of time, you may know your domain really well, but you don't know their company very well. You don't know exactly what their style is for, like, are you a 6-page memo kind of company? Are you everything's in PowerPoint kind of company? Are you, write me a piece of code kind of company, whatever that might be. And I think for that puts some stress on people because they're not necessarily used to that, or they're not sure. And I think to a certain extent, like the interview process is becoming much more like almost like a go-to-market process. Like, how would you go to market with yourself?
Yep.
And for a lot of people, especially in the technical domain, their years of being like, marketing is dumb, marketing is useless. All of a sudden it's like, oh, marketing is a survival skill that you have to have. And that's hard, because if it's not a natural thing to sell yourself, because you're just like, well, I've always been pretty good at stuff and I could figure it out and I'm good. That might be part of the struggle that people have, is that they don't know how to go to market themselves. And by that, what I mean is, how do you position kind of like you said, how do you position yourself as solving their problem, not necessarily, talking about yourself, all those sorts of things. So that actually, now that I think about that, actually would probably be a pretty good topic for a show, as to maybe we could use ourselves as a guinea pig. Like, how would we go to market ourselves?
No, and here's another one. I'll give you another, for instance, from this last year. I went through, again, it was one of the startups. I think it was 10 interviews. It was bordering on 10 interviews I had to do. Leading up to, last one was an interview with the CMO, and I had to create a 30 or 45 minute presentation, pitch it to the CMO, and it was exactly that, of like an analysis of our product outside looking in, our go-to-market, how would you change all of it? How would you change our messaging? And oh, by the way, it was me and I think 3 other candidates. And yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, now you've got the CMO kind of basically sourcing how to get better from the candidate pool, if you will.
Yeah.
And you know what? And I've had other friends that are like, they walked away. They're like, I'm not doing their homework for them. And I'm like, look, I get it, but that's the game now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like I've seen very heavy interview process of like either a lot of interviews or a lot of homework. You know, I had a buddy that got a PM job at AWS, and he literally spent almost a week on a project they gave him. Like he took off work, took vacation, and took a week off to study and for his AWS presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I almost wonder if like, and this sounds terrible, but like, you know, and we used to say this like earlier in our career, like, hey, you should kind of always be interviewing, right? Because you know, maybe you're going to be in a job for 2 years and you're 3 years or whatever. But like, I do think, given just a little bit that we've been talking about how interviews have changed and how the expectations of the interviewing process has changed, like, if you shouldn't just be like, I'm just going to go interview with some company and just sort of see what it's like, because you know, the reality is just like you would do as a resiliency exercise, you know, like say with your network or something, or with your application, you know, like life might come at you fast, right? And whether you're a startup founder or you're a mid-level manager, like we've had plenty of friends who've been like, dude, my group just got replaced, right? Yeah. So that may not be a terrible idea to say, like, look, one of the things I'm going to do this year is I'm going to go interview somewhere else. And again, you know, you can pick and choose how close to your industry you want to do, but just to sort of figure out what the new processes look like, right?
Chaos monkey for your career.
Yeah. Let me throw out one last thing, because we've been going quite a while, but this is sort of one of our favorite topics, and I know you and I have dealt with this both firsthand and secondhand. You are looking for some job, you find out about something, or somebody reaches out to you and they go, hey man, or gal, you're really smart about some stuff. We'd love to have you part of the team. And you go, okay, cool. Tell me more about it. Like, and they go, well, it's a this kind of role in this company. And your first thought is like, that's unusual. 'Cause like, I wouldn't think of that company as being, you know, needing that thing. That's not really their MO. And they go, well, that's a good observation. We're going to change the culture of the company. This is going to be an opportunity to change the company. If you hear that, what is your initial thought?
It's a trap. I will simply say, unless I have one caveat or one exception to it, unless they've done a full-on swap of everyone from the CEO down. Like it is an entire new C-level exec leadership change out run. The reason why I say that is because it's even more work than working at a startup, because you're hired to basically be the change agent or on the change agent team. And I'll give you, again, another for instance. I mean, enough time has gone by, I can probably say it. You know, in Solid Fire, my company was hired by NetApp, right? Like we got hired in and we were the cutting edge, all flash storage, and, you know, the ONTAP system was old and blah, 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 blah. And they brought us in and they gave us the pep talk and said, we're going to change the culture here. And yeah, that didn't, it was, you know, all the old ONTAPers were like, you know what, we're just going to wait you out because we bought another company a couple years ago and ran them into the ground. And I would say, I don't have a stat, I'm making this up, 85-90% of the time it's a fucking failure. Just run.
And that might be lowballing it. It might be lowballing it. It's I think I saved this till the end. We use it as sort of the butt of a joke. The companies love to
change the world.
Companies love to write press releases about, you know, either acquiring people or acquiring a leader, and they're going to change the culture of places. That is that is one of the hardest things in the world to do, because people inherently don't like to change. And you are not only asking your customers to look at you differently and change, but you're also asking the vast majority of your colleagues to do their job differently. And they're going, I think we're good. I think we're pretty good. So yeah, be very careful of the culture change agent
Yes.
jobs, because
Yes.
I'll tell you what, they sound so appealing, because they essentially sound like, we're going to be an internal startup. We're going to be internal, we're going to do it from the inside. And it's like really, really hard. That there's actually that, probably, if I'm going to bring this all back to the thing that we started about at the beginning with startups, internal change agents are essentially, or the failure of internal change agents are essentially the reason why there are so many funded startups, because the VCs, even though they have a terrible track record of volume of success, they know that their few percentage points is better than the even less than few percentage points of internal change agents, right? Like they can break your culture from the outside better than you can break it from the inside. So,
Agreed.
I'll leave with one last thing. We decided to talk about this stuff, and I know we rambled and we went all over the place. We fully recognize, because we've been hearing from lots of people that like things are tough out there, and we're not trying to marginalize stuff. We're not trying to make light of it. I know, man, if you've been looking for 3 months or 6 months, like that is stressful as hell. And we just simply were trying to come up with some things to say, like, hey, the next time you go through some of these things, like, this is just a different perspective on how to maybe approach something. But like, I know we don't have the answers, man. I wish we had a whole laundry list of just jobs that we were like, cool, give it to that guy and give it to that guy. And we would love to help folks if we know of those things. But like, hopefully some of this was a little bit helpful, because I know that stuff's stressful as hell.
A quick high note though. The single biggest bit of advice I could give to anyone, no matter where they are in career, looking or not looking, keep your network up and keep working on your network. And I'll give you a few examples. I was in the running for VP of product marketing job at an AI startup. Really, really wanted that job. CMO was good, got along really good with the CMO, had great things, and then got turned down for the job. And I was like, what the heck? Because I thought I had it in the bag. And it turns out, right as they were about to give me the offer, somebody that the CMO used to work with at a previous company came on the market. And they literally just hired that person without interviews or anything. And they were just like, well, we honestly, if this would have been 1 week later or 1 week earlier, we would have hired you. And why does that matter? Networking, right? And the role I'm in now, somebody turned me on to. And, I've been helping folks, throughout this year to try and connect, folks to jobs. And so the single biggest thing, a lot of people come to us and are like, what should I study? Or what can I take? Or that knowledge, domain expertise does matter, but it doesn't matter as much as a good network.
No, a good connection, somebody that knows you, somebody that trusts you, somebody that can vouch for your work. The only other thing I'll say, and I'll leave this as maybe the last word, and again, I know it's really hard if things get longer than a short period of time, but like from friends that I've talked to that have gone through stuff, and I've kind of gone through certain things myself, like the more you can keep up a routine, the more you can get up at a regular time, exercise, do some reading, keep your mind sharp, keep your health in decent shape. I know things are stressful. Like the last thing that you ever want to convey, even if you're fighting it as hard as you can, is the idea that you've got a certain amount of desperation to you, right? Like you want to come across as energetic and as kind of like ready to go as possible. And I know it's hard if things drag out a little bit longer, but like the more you can be like, every single day I'm going to get up as if like I had a job, and I'm going to do a set of things to try and, either make yourself better or at least not let yourself kind of drag into something else is super, super important, and advice I've heard from people over and over again that have been going through the process of like, I lost a job, I'm looking for something. So, all right, man, we've gone a long time. Hopefully a little bit this was helpful to the audience, and, good to do first thing of the year. And again, if we can help folks, like I said, I don't necessarily have just a Rolodex of open jobs, but again, if there's, if anybody there's some stuff we can help with, show at thecloudcast.net. We're always willing to listen some and offer whatever we can offer. So with that, let's wrap it up. Folks, thank you again for joining us in 2025. Excited to be back. I think we've got a lot of very, very interesting guests lined up. So we're excited about 2025. Aaron, let's wrap it up, and we will talk to folks next week.
Bye, y'all.
All right.